Thanks to my patrons for keeping the channel going in return for exclusive videos, link in the description, and to PlayStation for the early review code. Also, while this video does talk about the story of Spider-Man 2, I don't go into spoilers. That said, Spider-Man 2 assumes you've completed 2018's game, and so will this review. The intro to Insomniac's upcoming Spider-Man 2 is a real tour de force. Outside of the copious use of sand, somewhat dulling the visual splendour the game will go on to provide in spades, we have an opening, about 20 minutes or so, that tries to cram as much detail about the experience you're about to enter as possible. The intro, of course, teaches you the fundamental mechanics, but through the most bombastic implementation of said mechanics, at a truly colossal scale. It conveys both Miles' love for his family and friends, as well as Peter's slightly more assured scientific mindset, through the problems they both currently face, establishing the mentor-mentee relationship between the two, the perilous situation drawing as much comedy as thrills, as they juggle, almost literally, both the chaos right in front of them, as well as the relative mundanity of their personal lives, all topped off with a grand mechanical showcase of the gargantuan power afforded by their teamwork, a theme the narrative will go on to explore in greater detail. 20 minutes is all the game needs to give you all of this information. Like its 2018 predecessor, one of my favourite open world games ever, let it be said, this intro serves as a confident statement of intent. In a genre so content with simply filling your open mouth with meaningless slop, Spider-Man remains refreshingly taut and lean, free from the cruft of other open worlds. And then it takes about 40 minutes to go a bit Life is Strange, both tonally and mechanically. Later, what amounts to little more than a 20-minute walk and talk sees Peter getting lectured on the importance of maintaining bee populations. Didn't most people dislike these on-rails segments last time around? Didn't the last game handle this science stuff by, I don't know, having you jump off of really high buildings as Spider-Man? What happened here? To be clear up front, I'm not bringing this up to needlessly smack-talk a game that I ultimately came to really enjoy. I think Spider-Man 2 is a very good video game, and if you're excited for it, I do not think you'll be disappointed. Its combat and traversal are still largely a triumph of flow and expressiveness. The game still has personality to spare, often packed in where you least expect it. And its story is decent once it gets going. It's just plagued by a number of structural issues, especially up front. The thing is though, when its 2018 predecessor was so successful because of how tight a mechanical and thematic package it was, structural issues in one area tend to have a knock-on effect on other areas of the experience. That first game's collectibles and the scale of its world were eminently manageable. The scourge of open worlds requiring you to fast travel everywhere was nullified by the joy of basic movement, and every mechanical interaction, every system represented the potential for a joke, to convey character and personality, to tell the story through play. And I say all of this because what I'm about to go into with its sequel might seem highly critical, but bear in mind it's coming from a mega fan of that original game, and so the standard I'm holding this sequel to is suitably high. Not quite as good as 2018 Spider-Man still places this sequel a solid cut above the vast majority of other open world games. I just think it's interesting to examine those issues that arise when that beautiful less is more mentality of the original gets tested with, well, more. Because more is indeed what you get here. While previously they were relegated to their own separate releases, Spider-Man 2 makes the bold choice to feature both Peter Parker and Miles Morales as playable Spider-Men, ostensibly giving the player the choice to switch between the now dual protagonists at any point outside of missions. It's ambitious for sure, with each character having their own struggles and things they need to be focusing on at any given time. It's just that unfortunately this is where my issues with the structure of the story start to take shape. Again, let's take that 2018 title. That game was able to maintain a laser focus on that subtly deteriorating relationship between Peter and Octavius, with cleverly humanized villains nonetheless adding some cartoonish flair, as well as bolstering that central tragedy that's been built up from the start of the game. One that believably crescendos as the inevitability of Octavius becoming Doc Ock is revealed to be a case of a decent man broken by forces out with his control. This build-up renders Peter's fury at the game's conclusion all the more righteous, representing a culmination and overcoming of his own personal demons in the process. Character motivations and relationships are clear, they all get their time to breathe. Like the rest of the game's design, this story is tightly constructed. Here though, we have a game with far more moving parts at any given moment that Spider-Man 2 has trouble balancing. For one, while you could easily point at Octavius or Mr. Negative as the primary antagonists of that first game, here such identification becomes a bit harder, because there really isn't much of a primary antagonist until much later in the game's runtime. Is it Kraven? Well, no. I mean, as prominently as he featured in the game's marketing, and while his band of henchmen are a near constant threat in the open world, the character of Kraven himself is basically a non-entity. A plot device designed to kickstart the drama and nothing more, failing even to reach the level of the aforementioned villains from the first game he's now hunting. Similarly, it took me watching the launch trailer a couple of days after beating the game to suddenly remember, oh yeah, Lizard was in there, which I guess leaves the symbiote, but even putting to the side how late into the game the ramifications of its presence make themselves apparent, it's kind of hard to compare the measured, detailed, tragic downfall of Octavius to an alien that makes Pete go in a bit of a huff. A plot that, thanks to the dual protagonist setup still seeing the main quest playing out in one set order, unfortunately sees the now far more interesting character of Miles frequently sidelined. Indeed, Miles is lost. His plot mainly revolves around the fact that he never got closure for the death of his father in the last game at the hands of Mr. Negative, whose stumbling into the maelstrom of the game's events brings up a lot of internal struggles for our young hero. You know, what is the role of Spider-Man? In one of the more interesting turns for the game's framing of its villains, as opposed to just wailing on bad guys forever for making a bad choice, can those bad guys turn it around? Does Spider-Man need to forgive? What does justice look like when one puts on that mask? Now, not only does the game get really raw with this stuff when it wants to, going deep on Miles' personal trauma, this darkness is well balanced against the fact that, well, Miles is also doing all the fun, goofy stuff a Spider-Man should be doing. He's trying to get into a music technology course at university. He's learning about the history of jazz, tracing it to modern day hip-hop in a way that also touches on the conversations around cultural theft. He's fretting over the individual wording of text messages. Importantly though, he is, and subsequently we are, doing all of this while swinging around and beating up goons. That beautiful confluence of the mechanics of inhabiting this hero and the narrative of being just a dude commingling in a way that's reminiscent of what made that first game and its character study of Pete feel so comprehensive, funny, and charming. You're not just playing as the hero, you're an active participant in balancing the mundanities of his everyday life. A mix that, in these games, has always been as compelling as it is inherently comedic. Miles really shines here, in a way I'm not quite sure he did in his 2020 expansion. He is a fantastic character and an absolute joy to play as. It's just that all that fun stuff I mentioned, it's in the side missions. The main story, on the other hand, when it does give you control of Miles, seems to want to get past his own trauma purely so that he can go and help Pete deal with the aforementioned alien. With Peter's woefully bratty attitude resulting from such outside corruption, manifesting in a coarsening of his voice as he expresses mild frustration at his situation, all coming across as more than a little "get out of my room, mom," compared to Miles's far deeper, more heartfelt tale, making all the time dedicated to Peter feel somewhat misplaced here. The crux of Pete's struggle, the return of his best pal Harry Osborn, sees the introduction of a fairly well-rounded character, one who Pete can joke around with and who serves as a reminder of his life outside of Spider-Man. But it feels like, thanks to the fact that the game is having to juggle so much more in the same runtime as the first game, that Spider-Man 2 never quite gets as much out of this relationship that it perhaps could. There's surprisingly little exploration of the latent bitterness Harry feels details about his predicament. I'm not kidding when I say the focus really is mainly on Peter having an alien alter his brain to convince him that people don't appreciate him enough. And so, in lieu of any real fleshed out antagonist until more or less the end of the game, you have a plot that relies on random MacGuffins to a less than optimal degree, leaving the motivations of its main players appearing more than a little diffuse at times. A relative lack of focus, a rushing of major plot and character events, all of which stings all the more thanks to the reintroduction of, wait for it, the Mary Jane stealth missions. Look, I think Mary Jane is a great character, but I audibly groaned when I realised I was about to take control of her again. The game is already struggling to bring so many planes into land in what limited time it has, and this is where the time and effort is going? No one's favourite part about the first game? Even though her combat abilities have been slightly improved in order to alleviate some of that abject frustration experienced in the first game, these missions still just serve as awkward distractions from the fun of just swinging around. It's like the game has all this stuff going for it, and at points just doesn't quite realise what most people actually enjoy about playing a Spider-Man title. Which kind of neatly brings me on to perhaps my most significant issue with the way the game handles its story. See, Peter's narrative has always somewhat revolved, around the idea that he is just a dude, wanting to do just a dude things. And yet, being Spider-Man is hard, crucially thankless work. Being Spider-Man is the one thing keeping him from living a normal life. The thing that if he just ditched might leave him much happier, potentially fulfilled, but he simply can't let the city descend into the chaos it undoubtedly would do in his absence. And so he toughs it out, he endures the taunts, the jeers, the hit pieces, the gargantuan weight of his secret, and the toll it takes on his personal life. There's just one problem. Mechanically, taking on the role of Spider-Man is anything but thankless. In fact, as a suite of gameplay systems, Spider-Man represents one of the most intrinsically rewarding I can think of. To swing around the city is akin to having an IV drip of pure dopamine coursing through your veins. A pitch-perfect concoction of generously tuned progression systems, rocketing you through the ranks at a dizzying pace, alongside a collection of mechanics that for the most part really do reward skill and optimization at every turn, providing you great combat, traversal, and all the amazing character and story tidbits therein. And with all of that in mind, forget what the people say, forget Jonah, forget Mary Jane and Harry, forget everyone. I can literally fly. And in turn, those moments of unrestricted, exploratory freedom themselves become all the thanks one might need for enduring such mechanical hardships as the more frequent walk and talks through a lab or the downright lethargic trip to the fair. Those moments that, for the character of Peter Parker, are meant to represent pure, unfettered joy, free from the weight, the restraints of having to don the mask of Spider-Man. But for players like me, become those very restraints from the gameplay that is so rewarding on such a fundamental moment-to-moment level. Sure, these are the instances where the devs and writers get to funnel story and themes to you in what feels like a very direct way, akin to saying, sit down and eat your vegetables before you go outside. But when the gameplay itself can already tell us so much about these characters just through the act of moving or throwing a punch, these sequences where it all goes a bit Life is Strange feel all the more protracted as a result. The mechanical disconnect runs deep. But look, I know I've just spent well over 2,000 words dedicated to where I think this game's story falls short of its predecessor. But like I say, I still enjoyed the game a great deal. Even if it lacks the focus of the original, there are still enough raw moments of fury and tenderness in equal measure that by the end, I was still pretty damn sold on what was going on. Again, not quite as good as 2018 Spider-Man is still very good. It's a great deal of swashbuckling fun when it needs to be, bolstered by a visible debt you can see being paid to the Uncharted games in the form of some truly explosive set pieces, far more frequent and massive in scope than what came before. This is a good video game. Beating up bad guys still absolutely rules, with Spider-Man's particular take on the brawler model still seeing you enter a flow state that few other games can match. Its combo meter still remarkably flexible and forgiving in order to reflect that for these characters, the these fights are as much fun as they are potentially perilous. It's all a bit of a game to Peter and Miles, so why shouldn't it be fun for you to toy with your prey a little bit as well? Granted, the many boss battles you'll encounter across the game aren't exactly mind-blowing by any means. Couple the persistence of camera issues from the first game, with almost every boss following exactly the same template of wail on them in enclosed environments to drain their larger health bar multiple times while recognizing highly telegraphed patterns, and I'll choose to take the still frenetic encounters with regular mobs every time. To that end, you have a whole suite of new combat abilities, including the much touted parry, allowing you to explosively knock an enemy back just as they're about to land their blow. Personally, as much as I heard whispers about how you needed to use certain moves against certain types of foes, and how much these new additions changed the flow of combat, I can't say that was necessarily my experience. Sure, some bigger enemies might try to push you into utilizing your parry a little bit more than usual, but the timing is so ridiculously generous that it's barely a consideration, honestly. Ultimately, you can play this game how you played the last one, and doing so is exciting in the way it always has been. In a similar vein, let's talk about the updates to traversal. I didn't notice the increase in map size because A, at the end of the day, it's just more buildings to swing around, and B, as I say, I can literally fly now. That last game caught a lot of flack from certain corners of the critical sphere for its swinging being too automatic. I would say that while it wasn't exactly the most taxing maneuver on the planet, there existed something of a metagame in managing your momentum. Namely that while swinging in massive arcs was fun, what challenge existed took the form instead of using the point launch feature to try and maintain as straight a line as possible. Now though, with the addition of the wingsuit, well, kind of neat in its own right, that challenge is effectively removed entirely, as you just hit a button and all the work is kinda done for you. Now look, while you obviously can't drive in this game, there's the similar issue to something like Just Cause, where you find yourself thinking, what reason could I possibly have to use anything else? A fact that almost makes me mourn the fast travel purely for how absurdly seamless that process now is, and how you will categorically never need to use it. But look, to go back into hypercritical mode for a second, the way these new abilities are doled out between the two characters creates a bit of an issue in terms of the game's progression systems. Namely that now you have not just one upgrade tree, not just one each for Miles and Pete, but 3, including one for both of them. Throw in the separate tree for suit tech upgrades which affect damage and health, as well as the tree for web gadgets and all of their individual trees that all utilize the same arbitrary currencies as the ones used to purchase suits, and it meant that not only did things get a bit convoluted and overwhelming at times, I also didn't feel like I could properly invest in one of the most fun aspects of the last game, for fear of needing some daft token for a more tangible upgrade down the line. Although I'll say, having almost platinumed the game, go for the cool suits if you want to. I mean, outside of gaining more focus bars, the suit tech upgrades ultimately don't seem to mean all that much. Most noticeably of all though, there's a whole branch of the upgrade tree dedicated to Pete's symbiote powers, and without spoiling anything, the way the story plays out had me wondering at multiple points whether it was worth investing my skill points at all into it, because I wasn't sure when I was actually going to be able to use these powers, and it seemed odd that the game was encouraging me to invest in something that seemed pretty plainly bad narratively speaking, with the means by which the game gets around this issue later on feeling akin to playing tag when you were younger with that annoying kid who would suddenly say, well, that doesn't count because I had an invisible force field the entire time. And this is what I mean. That first game was so focused in its storytelling, and the way that story was bolstered by mechanics and systems, that these kinds of problems rarely, if ever, arose. Thanks to the dual protagonist structure and the vast number of plot considerations it brings along with it though, every other system is affected, from combat to upgrades. Spider-Man 2018 confidently asserted that when it comes to games, everything you touch as a player has the potential to be narrative, all the way down. An incredibly delicate balance that the sequel, for my money, doesn't quite live up to. I still really enjoyed my time with Spider-Man 2, but honestly that's why I'm so critical of it here. I adore this series, and Spidey 2's best moments are largely when it plays to those prior strengths. The flow of combat, the joy of traversing traversal, the streamlining of a genre, laid to waste by the likes of Ubisoft. It's all present and accounted for here. I am almost certain you will have a good time with it. It's just that almost every new feature acts as just a little bit of craft, that a lot of the time serves to dilute that purity of vision, just a little. Not a deal breaker, but certainly worthy of note, especially when the game has been receiving such universal praise elsewhere. 2018's game was confident enough to leave you wanting more. Spider-Man 2 gives us that more, so to speak, but reminds us that such an endeavour, if you're not careful, can indeed come with its own costs. If only there were a well-known nugget of pithy uncle wisdom one could use to sum up that sentiment. Thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, all that daft YouTube stuff. It really helps the channel and it means the world. A massive thanks as well to my patrons, who you can see on screen and are all getting access to exclusive, fully produced videos that aren't available here. Your continued support is what allows me to keep going with the work I do on this channel in a sustainable way, and I seriously cannot express how grateful I am for that. You are all the best. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsuk, Mel Meek, Michael Tritt, Rickety Cricket, Cameron Siniseros, Urban Cheese, Charles J. Liu, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Dolly Bowman, Young Condor, David Karstens, Tom Webster, Danis Sikauskis, Jordan Midler, Dylan Robinson, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Ruth Natman, Yogesh Shpande, Leah Chinello, Captain Knusprich, Bryce Snyder, CPJ MLT Limited, David Björk, Timothy Jones, Matthew Grover, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Shardfire, Lynn Browning, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.